Okay, so for my presentation, I did mine over Angela Carter and I titled it Angela Carter Fairy Tale to Feminism. So for my thesis, I wrote in Angela Carter's short stories, The Bloody Chamber and The Snow Child. The idea of feminism is shown through Carter's characters and redefining well known fairy tales by turning them into stories that empower women and embrace femininity. So I would like to start off with the first short story in her collection of short stories, which is The Bloody Chamber. So, The Bloody Chamber is based on the French folktale Bluebeard, and based on the research that I conducted, there are four main differences between Bluebeard and Carter's rendition, The Bloody Chambers. So, the first difference is that Carter made the leading male an advocate of the arts and collector of the pornography, and I have a quote from some of my research that says, thereby demonstrating a cultural foundation for his sadism and suggesting a relationship between art and aggression. And that is from my research from Sheets. And the second difference that was noted is that the wife is the narrator, which is not usually seen in fairy tales, but I'll go more into that later. The third difference is the development of the second husband. And the fourth is that Carter restores the mother as a resilient and courageous character as opposed to non existent and a meek character. So we'll start with the Marquise. So the Marquise definitely represents toxic masculinity, and toxic masculinity definition is it involves the need to aggressively compete and dominate others, and encompasses the most problematic proclivities in men. And he definitely represents that he is continuously talking down to his wife. He often refers to her as like a baby, and not in like an endearing way, like talking like, "Oh, you're a baby, you would never understand when you grow up," blah blah blah. Which I mean, I think is super rude. But then he also displays multiple times aggression towards his wife, and then obviously in the end he like tries to behead her, and I think that's like the ultimate aggression. The second character I want to talk about was the wife, and I think that this portrays feminism by showing that she's taking back the power through narration. Typically, women were not given a voice in fairy tales, and this is an instance where Carter allows a woman and the main character to have a voice in their story. And we also see character growth, which is something not usually seen for women in fairy tales. You can see at the very beginning of this short story that the wife is very concerned with what others are thinking of her and like putting on her best show, very materialistic. And we can, by the end of the story, it's a very different way that she views herself. And that's why I included this woman in process, because that's what she is. She's just in process. She's still young. She still cares what people think, but she cares in a different way. And I think that that shows growth, which again is not usually something seen in fairy tales. The third character, Gene Ives, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, he is physically blind, meaning he is incapable of the male gaze or objectifying when based on their physical appearance. And this helps to further feminism by showing like what a healthy relationship between a man and a woman should and can look like with the absence of the male gaze. Because with that male gaze, I think Carter's trying to say that a healthy relationship cannot occur as seen between the Marquise and the wife. So lastly, the mother, she kind of furthers, I think, encompasses feminism altogether. She let her daughter choose her fate. In the very beginning, she questions the daughter's decision to marry the Marquise, but doesn't force her not to, or doesn't force her to marry her, which or him. And I think giving her a choice is showing feminism, because usually women did not have a choice in who they would marry. The mother also portrays, or she's portrayed as courageous. The daughter mentions multiple times that she's courageous. She mentioned once that when I thought of courage, I thought of my mother. So typically, women were not portrayed as courageous beings. They're just kind of meek characters, typically in fairy tales, and that's Carter's way of flipping flipping the switch on people. And lastly, she experienced autonomy and adventure. It was mentioned in the beginning that the mother traveled and had all these wild adventures and saved villages and married for love, and she also didn't remarry. So I think she just really embodies that autonomy and adventurous type. So the overall story of the Bloody Chamber really portrays feminism, especially in the ending when the mother is the hero or the heroine and saves the daughter, and it's not some man or knight in shining armor that saves her. And I think that this story really illustrates differences between the sexes. There's the maternal telepathy that the narrator credits some others' intuition on saving her. And I believe that this is Carter's way of showing that yes, there are differences between men and women, but the differences should be celebrated and one shouldn't be seen as more important than the other. They each has their own courage and thing in the world. And I think that Carter shows that through the maternal telepathy. So the next story I would like to talk about is The Snow Child. So this child has the three characters, and I believe the Count represents men, the Countess represents women and feminism, and the Snow Child represents the fantasy woman. The Countess tries multiple times to destroy the Snow Child, and I believe that that's feminism's way of trying to destroy objectifying women, that men try to objectify women, and like the fantasy woman that men develop. And overall, I think what was really interesting was when the Count would come up with all these different characteristics for his fantasy woman, the Countess would lose an article of clothing. I think that was a representation of like a loss of humanity. Like you're stripping by men objectifying women, but also hypersexualizing them and creating this ideal perfect woman is creating or just losing humanity for the real women in the world. And I think that by having the Countess destroy the Snow Child, it's her way of destroying fantasy woman, which I think is Carter's uh, main point, is like destroying the idea of like sexualizing and objectifying women. So for my conclusion, I wrote, in her short stories, Carter confirms the idea that feminism is more than just being seen as an equal. It means to be seen as human, as real. So thank you for listening.